Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sacked for Wrong Think podcast. And it's Monday, the 27th of January. Firstly, apologies for not having another episode out. I wanted to get one out over the weekend, but we had a pretty nasty storm in the UK on Friday, and it took out the electricity where we live in Northumberland, and that electricity was only restored this morning. So as you can imagine, today is mostly, so far, been about running around the house trying to get everything back in shape. When you have to rely on daylight to see what's going on, it's quite horrible when you switch the electric lights on and just realize how dusty and miserable the house has been without any electricity. We should always count our blessings for the technology that we live with. Because it's no fun having to live without electricity for any prolonged period of time. I can tell you, novelty wears off very quickly. Anyway, today I want to talk about a couple of things which are related. And one of the things one of the articles one of the movements we've started to see over the last 12 months has been a wind back in certainly the corporate world in the UK in their commitment to blindly signing up to third-party programs to promote equality, diversity, and inclusion, and a caution slipping into HR departments when allowing their employee advocacy groups and marketing teams and procurement teams to push forward with these types of initiatives. And there's some very good reasons for this. Principally, you've got a bit of a situation if you do this, because you're essentially outsourcing your entire brand as an employer to a third party. So if you take, for instance, the LGBTQ awards that were held in Britain last summer, where David Tennant, the actor, very controversially stood up to accept an award as a champion for trans rights, and basically said that he wouldn't be sorry if the then Equalities Minister, Kemi Badenoch, was ended. And he did this in front of on a stage, and behind him on the stage were the sponsorship logos of half a dozen very, very influential British employers, from Tesco's to insurance companies. And I'm wondering how many of these companies actually celebrated David Tennant standing up and saying something so controversial with their brand behind him. And I think that, whilst at the time, there was a lot of applause for Tennant, it was extremely divisive. And we're certainly picking up on shareholders of employers now getting quite impatient with jeopardizing business success through such performative gestures. People are getting fed up with it. And obviously we've seen in the United States mostly down to the efforts of Robbie Starbuck, a backpedaling from corporate DEI, as they call it, over there. I think one of the things that's really coming out in the wash is just how divisive so-called inclusivity policies actually are. Time and time again, we actually see in the headlong rush to implement equality, diversity, inclusion, we see the very opposite actually happening as a result at the employer. And we've certainly seen this in the UK. I've touched on several times the Free Speech Union's report published this time last year, which was quite damning actually in its analysis of the impact that EDI's had on the UK workplace. And if you actually go into the figures and the details of that report, which was carried out with very thorough research, this isn't some sort of activist-led make the evidence fit the argument situation. This was from raw data gathered by Dinata, one of the most respected research businesses in the world. It makes disconcerting reading, and I would encourage any HR department or any director in any company or employer to actually sit down and read that report and have a think about the implications of it. Because you might actually be thinking, I'm sure you are, that the EDI policy you've been persuaded into implementing may actually be beneficial for your organization, when in fact it certainly is not, and might actually be achieving precisely the opposite. So I would urge you to have a look into that. You can see get a link to that in the description on below this podcast. So today I just wanted to talk about a story that the Times have been covering, and which the Free Speech Union have also covered. And this is news out yesterday that Whitehall's biggest departments are dumping the Stonewall Diversity Champion Program. So the Stonewall Diversity Champion Program has been quite controversial, and we'll go on to that in a minute. But first, I just want to rattle through this article with you, and then I want to give you my response and reaction to it. So I'll put a link to the original article. Every major UK government department, including some of the largest, such as the Home Office and Treasury, has pulled out of Stonewall Diversity Champions Programme, the DCP, amid growing concerns over how the programme's influence on government policies might limit free speech on gender ideology. The exodus came amid growing concerns over the group's influence on Whitehall's internal policies. More than 50 ministerial departments contacted by the Times confirmed that they are no longer part of the scheme, though the initiative continues to attract major businesses, local government bodies and universities, and we've also seen it in NHS trusts and other public sector organisations. Among the departments that exited were some of the largest, such as the Home Office and Treasury, joining hundreds of other public and private sector organisations that had previously contributed to the programme. Stonewall has long promoted the DCP as the gold standard for LGBT plus inclusion, but it faced significant backlash for prioritising gender identity over biological sex and for allegedly favouring trans rights at the expense of women's rights. Last week, Eleanor Francis, a former civil servant who raised concerns about the promotion of transgender ideology, secured a significant settlement after claiming the civil servant's approach to these issues and single-sex spaces was unlawful. She was awarded £116,749 following an 18-month legal battle with her former departments, the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, DCMS, and the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. Frances argued that despite the civil service's commitment to impartiality, transgender ideology had become so entrenched that expressing gender-critical beliefs, views she deemed worthy of respect, felt impossible. Under the Equality Act 2010, philosophical beliefs such as gender-critical views can be protected from discrimination if they meet the Granger test. The Granger test requires that the belief is sincerely held, substantial, and worthy of respect. While gender-critical views have been recognised as protected beliefs in some cases, they may lose that protection if expressed in ways that constitute harassment or infringe on others' rights. Francis's case reignited scrutiny over inclusion and diversity policies within Whitehall departments and highlighted the ongoing tension between championing transgender rights and protecting the expression of lawful gender-critical beliefs in the workplace. Workplaces that signed up as diversity champions receive free entry into Stonewall's Workplace Equality Index, often seen as a benchmark for LGBTQ+ equality. The Times reported in 2021 that organisations were awarded higher scores for aligning their policies with Stonewall's agenda, which led to bodies removing gendered language and replacing terms like mother with birthing parent or pregnant employee. Women's rights campaigners point out that these policies have unintended consequences, including allowing males who self-identify as trans women to access women-only spaces. In 2022, following a campaign by Liz Truss, the then Women and Equalities Minister, ministers were advised to exit from the DCP and instead implement an internal assessment. The Ministry of Defence and Foreign Office confirmed they allowed their membership to expire, and DCMS, Francis's former employer, formally withdrew in 2022. Francis, however, cautioned, leaving these schemes is not enough to undo their lasting influence. If organizations have incorporated biased or unlawful practices into their policies and strategies, these will continue unless they're actively addressed. Stonewall responded, saying that it is common for organizations to reassess their membership based on their current needs, adding that there is an ebb and flow to such decisions. Despite the withdrawal of several government departments, the DCP initiative still attracts major corporations, local governments, and academic institutions, underscoring the ongoing divide over inclusion and diversity policies in public life. So that was the article by Freddie Attenborough, published on the 26th. It draws heavily on an article from the Times, which I'll also provide a link to. So just a few thoughts on this. I today added a post to the Sacked for Wrongthink Substack, containing links to this particular article and to discussing some of this a little bit in a little bit more detail. And certainly what we've seen here is, I think, welcome. It's a start. You've got 15 government departments indicating that they've pulled out of Stonewall's Diversity Champions program. And we finally seeing the public sector wake up from this madness? Well, yes and no. I'm being quite vocal about my position on this as an HR professional. We are seeing on almost a weekly basis employment tribunals or settlements being made by UK public sector institutions, where the employer has overreached and persecuted an employee for holding beliefs that are protected in law. When the sunlight of legal due process shines on these incidents, what's disconcerting is that those who are responsible for these incidents demonstrate some worrying gaps in their knowledge. A couple of examples here. First of all, an ongoing case at County Durham and Darlington NHS Foundation Trust, which has been sued by a group of nurses who are objecting to be forced out of their changing facilities because they refuse to share them with biological men. When the HR business partner responsible for their department met with them, she allegedly informed them that the trust had no choice but to allow the biological man into the facilities because of the Equality Act saying so. The Equality Act says nothing of the sort. Another example is the Chief Constable's Office of Thames Valley Police last year fought and lost an employment tribunal over allegations they'd racially discriminated against 3 white officers. There emerged evidence that the inclusivity policy of the police service and the equality, diversity, inclusion training delivered to new employees and constables had a significant gap between them, and the failure to align the training course to the actual policy behind it resulted in the service not only talking itself into fighting an employment tribunal, it had no chance of winning, but senior management's hell-bent on this ignored their own in-house experts in this area. Firstly, the resourcing manager responsible for recruitment and deployments, and secondly, and probably more controversially, their own in-house solicitors. The tribunal judge was particularly harsh in singling out the individuals responsible. There's now an in-house investigation being carried out by the PCC for Thames Valley, and he's indicated the results of that investigation will be published soon. So it remains to be seen if anyone will be held personally liable for the numerous incidents we see here, despite the huge cost to the taxpayer, the devastation to the victims' lives, and the reputational damage to their employer. And we've yet to see anyone being held responsible for these actions. I've covered this issue on my other Substack, and I'll put a link to that below. But until individual managers are held to personal account for such behaviour, I suspect we'll continue to see repeats of it. Now, I don't know if either of the above employers were part of the Stonewall Diversity Champions programme, but it wouldn't be surprising me if they were. A major fault with the programme was how it appears to encourage members into conduct that puts them at risk of breaking the Equality Act 2010. Even if it doesn't go that far, it results in the effect of naming and shaming and possible exclusion of employees refused to publicly sign to Stonewall's pledges. Exeter University implemented this last year, despite protests from some members of staff. They signed up in 2024, so in June 2024. So whilst we welcome the announcement for Whitehall that departments are pulling out of this, we are going to see we're still seeing organisations signing up, and there's also a lasting cultural issue left behind in these departments, as members of staff will need to be retrained and are in many cases utterly confused as to what they should be doing. It's going to be incumbent on the HR departments within these organisations to ensure that there is a reset and that all employees are treated fairly. The starting point should be the employment law and the Equality Act 2010. But I am sceptical as to whether this will happen, as it is these very HR departments that have been behind implementing the very initiatives that have got these employers into deep water in the first place. I think radical reform of HR departments, including a return to back to basics HR and a removal of ideological and political agendas being dressed up as equality, diversity, inclusion, would be a start. The major problem is that these are political monocultures. They are true believers, and those beliefs are reinforced with organizational groupthink that has removed any dissenting voices from these teams. Now, call me a cynic, but I think we're in for a long road to restore actual diversity of thought and inclusivity for everyone into our workplaces. And with a Labour government hell-bent on pushing EDI through the public sector procurement policies, I can't see this happening anytime soon. So that's it for today, folks. Tune in tomorrow for another podcast. And in the meantime, I hope you enjoy your day. If you've got any questions, please add them below. And please, please, please follow us, like, share, and hit the bell on this podcast. We are entirely dependent on listeners, and we're also entirely dependent on your membership and donations in order to fund the Sacked for Wrong Think initiative. Now, if you have a story to tell around how you have been cancelled, if you've lost your job, or if you've been cancelled from a club or society, or a group of individuals because they didn't like your opinions, then please do get in touch in confidence, because we will be able to give you a voice. And we can do that anonymously. If you know of anybody who this has happened to, then you try and encourage them to get in choice. We were set up and established to try and give you a voice. There are hundreds of thousands of people across the UK who've been bullied into silence when they have perfectly valid and perfectly legal opinions and views. If we don't start allowing open discourse in our society again, then we are going to be heading to a very dark place as a society. So please do follow us and join the crusade here. In the meantime, that's it for today, and I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.